Welcome. Thank you for coming out. The Department of Geography, Geology, and Environmental Science. I'm a professor. I can yell in a big room like this. And the undergraduate research program would like to introduce you to Tyler Brasington. Tyler is a 2017 graduate of UW-Whitewater with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science. Since 2020, Tyler has held the position of a lead bear management park ranger in Grand Teton National Park in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. During the off season, when the bears are hibernating, and also during the summer when he can, he also serves as an emergency medical technician and serves on the Grand Teton National Park search and rescue crew as well. Tyler is involved in a lot of interagency activities, including the Grizzly Bear Research Trapping Team and the Gray Wolf and Coyote Research Capture Team. He is also on a research team that's looking at the interactions between elk hunters and grizzly bears. He has completed many trainings along the way to better his career. This includes things like mental health first aid, response training, aviation training, carcass removal training, and wildfire training, as well as many other things. He has been awarded the National Park Service Star Award 6 times, and he is also the recipient of the United States Geological Survey's Director's Achievement Award. Tyler continues to exemplify what it means to be a war hawk. He gives back to his colleagues, his community, his science, and the world, with around 20 invited talks to groups from local audiences all the way up to the international level. He has provided 17 trainings to groups of visitors and fellow colleagues at Grand Teton National Park. He has 20 publications in books and journals, including the Journal of Wildlife Management and International Association for Bear Research and Management, with an additional handful of publications in preparation to go out to other journals. Please help me welcome my bear guy, Tyler Brasington.
Good evening, and thank you so much, Dr. Fry, for inviting me back to campus. I'm really excited to share my passion for bears with everybody here tonight and take you along the journey of how I got to where I am currently. Whitewater played an integral role in where I am today. We'll start off with a short video, hopefully that will entertain everybody here. This is what a bear capture looks like when we go to release the said bear.
Outside of Chicago is the baddest part of town. And if you go down there, you better just beware of a man named Leroy Brown. Now Leroy, more in trouble. You see, he stand about 6'4". Although downtown ladies call him treetop lover, all the men just call him sir. And it's bad, Leroy Brown. Baddest man in the whole damn town. Better than old King Kong, and meaner than a junkyard dog. Now Leroy, he a gambler, and he like his fancy clothes, and he like to wear his diamond rings in front of everybody's nose. He got a custom Continental, he got a Eldorado too. He got a 32 gun in his pocket for fun. He got a razor in his shoe. It's bad, Leroy Brown. Baddest man in the whole damn town. Better than old King Kong, and meaner than a junkyard dog.
So that's not an ideal bear release. They're not supposed to chase the truck like that. But just wanted to give you an intro to that. And that video was made courtesy of Jessica Hadley, who worked for the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team for several years. She's actually sitting in the middle of the audience right there. Here are some other unique interactions with remote cameras that we've got set up in the park. So we have an array of remote cameras we set up for wildlife surveillance and monitoring. And occasionally we'll get one of these big Bruins that has a little bit of curiosity, maybe a little bit photogenic, mouthing at the camera. As you can imagine, we carry a unique scent. Bears, I've been told, and it's been described to me, that they can see smells. That is how powerful their noses are. And so if you think about that, they can smell everybody that's handled that camera and where it's been. And we get some really unique behavior, like this black bear rubbing on a rub tree and urinating, marking his territory in the process. So it's pretty common throughout Grand Teton. We have a lot of rub trees, and it's chemical communication for bears. Get a little bit of hip action there. And so the story that I'm going to tell you today is kind of how I got to where I am in this role for Grand Teton National Park, being one of 2 lead park rangers for the bear management program. If you're interested, I wrote an article for the Wildlife Professional briefly summarizing how I got to where I am currently and kind of the nonlinear path that I've taken to get to where I am currently. Bears weren't always in the cards for me. There was a lot of trials and tribulations for me over the years in terms of what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania. My family had a cabin in the Pocono Mountains, and so I was immersed in nature at a very young age and surrounded by black bears. And so from a very early age, as you can see in the upper left, black bears were kind of my spirit animal in a sense. Over the years, got to high school, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, wasn't even sure if college was really in the cards for me. I had a lot of friends that were interested in pursuing careers in the U.S. military, and that was kind of the route I was looking to pursue. My dad convinced me to basically go to school and try it, and so I had selected Whitewater. Whitewater was always at the top of my list for institutions that I wanted to attend. And so after 1 year here, I spent 2012 here, and while on campus, I was involved with Air Force ROTC. And I dropped out after my first year and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that I belonged in the classroom and the Marine Corps was not the place for me. That was just kind of one of those speed bumps in the road along the way. Experience, it's gathered across a lifetime. It's not something that just pops into your lap one day. So I take that experience in stride, and that's how I got to where I am today. When I got out of the military, I knew right away I wanted to go back to Whitewater. And so when I attended Whitewater for the first time after a 2-year absence, I came back and still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was dabbling in exercise science, physiology. I tried a little bit of physics and engineering. And then I came to the realization of I can't sit in front of a desk the rest of my life. I just can't do it. I've got to be outside. I've got to be active. And so I took a little sabbatical out west after my first year back at Whitewater. And I went to Glacier National Park, Yellowstone National Park, and Grand Teton National Park. And I spent about between 1 to 2 months on the road. And all I did was backpack and hike. And I remember some of the first advice I received to people, before I went on this trip: watch out for the bears. You're going to be in bear country. And it was this notion of unpredictability and dangerous, large megafauna in this ecosystem. And I really had no idea what it was all about until I got out there. And within the first 2 days I was in Glacier National Park, this was the very first grizzly bear I came across. And this image that you're looking at inspired me. And being able to watch these bears dig and move earth in this meadow, completely undisturbed by the fact that I was standing there watching them. They weren't bothered by my presence at all, and something about them captivated me in that moment, and I carry it with me to this day. And it was that moment that kind of set the tone for when I came back to Whitewater that fall, what I would be doing. And so, came back to Whitewater, met with my academic advisor. I said, what can I do to work with these big Bruins? Well, who can I talk to? And what major can I pursue? And the recommendation was to go into biology or environmental science. And at the time, environmental science seemed to be a bigger draw for me because it's all-encompassing, it's multidiscipline. So I was recommended by my advisor to speak to Dr. George Clokey about going on one of his Yellowstone travel studies. And it was life-changing for me because I went on that winter trip with George and met one of the greatest mentors that I've had to date, Dr. James Halfpenny. And Jim said to me, he's like, if you want to work with bears, he's like, come out and do a residency program with me for the summer. And so I came back to the university, and I remember meeting with Dr. Splinter and getting all that ironed out for an internship and doing undergraduate research with the undergraduate research program. For 2 months that summer, I was immersed in the front country and in the back country of Yellowstone National Park in the Northern Range. And I had the privilege of being in the field from sunup to sundown, just watching grizzly bears, observing their behavior, and documenting their whereabouts. I came back to Whitewater and we put together a project. We were looking at distribution of where grizzly bears existed in the Northern Range. I'd be doing a disservice to everybody that came before me if I didn't mention these two gentlemen up on the screen right now. There's Frank and John Craighead. They are the pioneers of grizzly bear research, and a lot of what I learned during the early onset of my career and during my undergraduate research was from these two gentlemen. The Craighead brothers recorded the very first population data on the Yellowstone grizzly bear population. And not only that, but if you ever have downtime, go on YouTube and look at how a grizzly bear charged and made contact with their station wagon. So they had immobilized bears, they were studying them, they're the pioneers of radio telemetry, and so they were the first people to really be able to follow the bears on the landscape and track their whereabouts. They were developing some really cool spatial techniques that were pioneering for the period of time that they were in. And they studied the Trout Creek grizzly bear population between 1959 and 1970. And so they really recorded the very first information that we had on grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park to help inform management. So Marion was their very first bear that they captured. And I related to Marion quite a bit because it reminded me of that interaction that I had with a grizzly bear in Glacier National Park. That was the very first bear that I had ever laid eyes on. And so for the Craigheads, you can see one of the very first radio collars. It's pretty janky. It was the best for its time, but it did the job. The Craigheads, as opposed to today, they built every single one of their radio collars in a lab up in Canyon within Yellowstone National Park. And so now we have manufacturers that mass produce these devices. And so if you think about all these things combined, it really makes the Craigheads quite a unique team. So they recorded a documentary called Grizzly, and it was a National Geographic documentary that came out and captivated a lot of different people during that period of time, and it focused on the Craigheads' work in Yellowstone National Park. And this is one of the quotes that resonated with me when I was doing my research in Yellowstone. It's all creatures, including man, exhibit some common behavior traits deeply rooted in animal instincts and animal drives. So as we strive to know ourselves and to understand our behavior, we find there is much that we can learn by studying other animal life, whether it be mice or grizzly bears. And so whether it's at the population level or even at the individual level of an animal, there's a lot that we can figure out. And so as I mentioned before, Dr. Clokey taught for 28 years here at Whitewater. He connected me with Dr. James Halfpenny, who's world-renowned tracking expert and ecologist. He studied carnivores for his entire career, whether it be bears or wolves. And so I met with these two gentlemen, and they helped me develop this project idea and connect me with one another. And Jim introduced me to this gentleman in the center of the screen. His name is Kerry Gunther, and he is a world-renowned expert on grizzly bears in North America and in the Yellowstone ecosystem. And Kerry Gunther is actually who gave me my very first break. So when I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, I actually got a job working fisheries to start, fisheries and AIS in Grand Teton. And I'd work 4 days and I'd have 3 days off. And I was hounding Kerry every single day that I could. I said, Kerry, I want to volunteer in bear management up in Yellowstone. And he never got back to my emails. I was on him every single month from the time I graduated school up until I got out there. And it wasn't until June that Kerry called me. He didn't even email me. He gave me a call. And he said, you still want to come up here? And I said, yeah. And so I'd come up on my 3 days off. So for one entire summer, I worked 7 days a week. I did not have a day off. And so I worked 4 days doing fisheries, 3 days up in Yellowstone. And I still wouldn't trade it for anything. There's not many people that can say that they're doing everything that they love every single day of the week and they don't get burned out. I don't know if I could do it for years on end, but it worked for that summer and it got my foot in the door. Going back to some of the research that I was doing. So Dr. Splinter was my advisor at the time, and we were looking at spatial relationships and demographics of grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park, specifically focusing on the Northern Range, the Lamar Valley. And so during my time working with Halfpenny, when I was out there, we put together a manuscript. It's roughly 70 pages, I believe, and it focuses on the distribution of bears throughout the park. And it breaks it down by individual family group. So our biggest cohort that we were interested in were females with cubs, or females with any dependent offspring. And so we were recording those unique families and using some of the parameters that were developed by the Craigheads and the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team, where we were successfully able to delineate and differentiate between unique family groups. This was my undergraduate research poster that I presented at the National Conference for Undergraduate Research. And surprisingly, I actually put in for a grant to go out during the winter and do some late season observational studies, because that seemed to be the period of time where we had the least amount of information. And it makes sense. If you think about observational data, there's not a whole lot of people in the park during the winter months. There's going to be a little bit of a decrease in your reporting. There's going to be a slight bias. And so my idea was to get out there and really look in these high density places where we knew grizzly bears were going to be occurring, and then looking for sign of grizzly bears in the said areas. And so these are 2 bear tracks that we were able to identify during the winter project study. And believe it or not, this project actually reached all the way to when I was pursuing my master's degree, and I had this enormous observational data set that went from 2019 all the way up to about 2022. And it was observation on every single day that a bear was out. And it was a combination of observers, combination of park staff, we had so many different people contributing to this data set. And the idea was that maybe this would shed light on some management implications that we have for roadside bear viewing in Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. And as you can see on the study area map, there's a high density of bear observations in that northern range. So part of that has to do with view shed, and it has to do with how far you can see away from the road in these areas. So visibility and the ability to see into different terrain is definitely in the northern range, and then into Hayden Valley as well as you get into central Yellowstone. This project was also presented at the Wildlife Society conference during COVID, unfortunately, so it was presented in a virtual setting. And so really, what did the undergraduate research program do for me at Whitewater? Well, it did a number of things. First of all, the professional relationships that you build through going the undergraduate research program here are absolutely phenomenal, and they're imperative and paramount to where I got to where I am today. Being able to network with people like Jim Halfpenny, being able to network with the head bear biologist in Yellowstone, Carrie Gunther. Had it not been for those relationships, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today as one of 2 bear specialists for Grand Teton National Park. Aside from the professional relationships, you've got presentation and communication. So being able to communicate with an audience effectively, being able to captivate people that you're talking to, and being able to convey whatever information you are at a lower level that can be understood by all. I think sometimes we speak to the scientific community when it comes to doing research and data, and it's extremely important to know your audience and who you're talking to. And the program really helped me understand and be able to convey the information in an understandable way. Statistics and specialties like GIS, I think it's really important. A project like this was all-encompassing with different disciplines in areas that I might not have been familiar with, but it gave me the experience and the know-how to be able to basically put those on my resume and say, yeah, I've got basic understanding and basic experience in this, and not being afraid to dip your toes in and just go all in and try to learn something new every once in a while. Scientific and technical writing is big. I'm a huge writer. I love to produce and put out research and findings, whether it be small or something large, low or high impact. It's all important, because 20 years down the road, when somebody wants to know about a certain behavior we observed that might have been for the very first time, that is relevant to the future generation. I became familiar with grants, being able to put in for that grant during the winter to go out to Yellowstone and perform some of the observational research, gather that information, and then receiving constructive feedback from my peers. Going to conferences, being able to talk with other professionals, being able to have that critique and facilitate that dialogue, because that does nothing more than improve you as both a professional and an individual. And really, for me, undergraduate research helped me understand, do I really want to do research? Do I want to do management? Do I want to get a master's? Do I want to do a PhD? Ultimately, I've got a master's right now, and I definitely want to pursue my PhD. I'm very research-minded, but in the current position that I occupy, it's a combination of both research and management. And to get into bear positions, working in the bear world is extremely competitive. And so I think the undergraduate research program here at Whitewater set me above and beyond most candidates for the role. And so I highly attribute my success in being able to get my foot in the door with bear management to this program and the research I was able to do here at Whitewater. And so just to give you some background on where I'm at and what I've done in the past. So I served as a fisheries technician at Grand Teton, first out of college. Same time, volunteering up in Yellowstone as a bear management technician. I actually also worked at the National Wildlife Health Center in Madison, Wisconsin. And so I was working with vampire bats, little brown bats, big brown bats, waterfowl, a whole plethora of species while I was there. And it was primarily focused on disease research. And I'll kind of tie that in a little bit later. And then I also served a temporary detail for the Grizzly Bear Recovery Program, which oversees all grizzly bear recovery in the lower 48 United States. And then currently, my lead role is in the Bear Management Office in Grand Teton, and I also serve in emergency services and search and rescue capacity. So now we're going to dive into some basic bear biology. This is what people are generally interested in. So when we think about ourselves as humans, what do you think about the senses? And you don't have to shout this out loud, but what senses drive you as a human being? And so as a human, you're focusing more on your eyes and your ears, so the ability to see and the ability to hear your surroundings. For a bear, that is vision and hearing, yes, but their sense of smell is really what drives them on the landscape. And so, as I mentioned before, it's been described that bears can see smells. And that's not the reality, but that saying is to articulate just how powerful that sense of smell is. We're looking at a sense of smell 7 times greater than that of a bloodhound and over 2,000 times greater than that of a human being. So it's pretty powerful. That nose is what drives them on the landscape for food and other reasons, breeding, territory. Their claws. So grizzly bears, their claws, if you hold up your hand and you look at the distance between the middle finger and the base of your palm, that's the maximum length for a grizzly bear claws. If you look at the length of your middle finger, that's about the average. 2 inches is about the average claw length for our grizzly bears. Grizzly bears are promiscuous. They mate with multiple bears. They're not monogamous by any means. Those males, there's 3 things that drive male grizzly bears and females. That's sex, sustenance, and security. Being able to do all 3 of those things in combination with each other, that's what drives grizzly bears on the landscape. Their strength compared to humans, 2.5 to 5 times the strength of the average human being. We're not talking like a bodybuilder like Phil Heath or Arnold Schwarzenegger. We're talking about the average human being. Their speed, 35 to 40 miles an hour. If you quantify the fastest man in the world, Usain Bolt, he can't even outrun a bear. So it's pretty amazing. Bears can run just as fast as a racehorse. Weight, males versus females, there's a little sexual dimorphism going on. So males weigh more than females do. The average weight for males in Yellowstone is about 415 pounds, and for females it's about 260 or so. As I mentioned before, we're talking about olfaction, or their sense of smell. And if you look at the difference between, and just be aware this is not to scale, bears do not have the same size brain as humans, but this diagram is merely to articulate the olfactory bulbs. So that's what those 2 things in the red box are. Those are considered olfactory bulbs, where millions of nerve endings are feeding olfaction in the brain. And so that's why, if you compare the 2, you can see just why, anatomically, why bears might have a better sense of smell than humans do. So if we talk about reproduction, Bears are really unique, and bears are unique in the sense that, one, they have one of the lowest reproductive rates among all North American terrestrial mammals. And so that's why recovery has taken this long. Bears were first listed in 1975 under the Endangered Species Act. They went from about 136 individuals up to now about 1,100 in the greater Yellowstone. They have delayed implantation, or what's referred to as embryonic diapause. That means that when they are breeding between the months of May and July, they're hooking up with their partners, but implantation is actually not taking place. There is no development, there is no fetus. The only way that that happens is if there's adequate nutrition in that female's diet, if they have adequate fat stores. We found in the Yellowstone grizzly bear population between 20 and 30% fat ensures that implantation does take place. If the female has less than 20 to 30% body fat, then we usually see no implantation take place. And it's important to differentiate that it's not abortion, it's not aborting the fetus because there is no development, so it's absorption. And so it's being absorbed back into that female's body. This is a really unique reproductive strategy employed in the life of brown bears globally. So this isn't just specific to the Yellowstone grizzly bear population. And this information has been known for decades. The Craighead brothers actually found that the blastocyst ceases dividing, and instead of implanting to the uterine wall, is dormant and just free suspending in that uterus until that female's body says, yes, you are healthy enough to endure a pregnancy. So really unique. That's just a brief illustration of kind of the year-round annual patterns for grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone. So you've got the birth of cubs, den emergence, mating, hyperphagia, which refers to a period of continual eating. So they're just gouging themselves, eating as much food as they can for hibernation. So in terms of nutrition and diet, grizzly bears are opportunistic omnivore generalists. They have extreme dietary plasticity, so if something disappears on the landscape, they have the ability to be resilient and adapt and jump to a different food source to supplement whatever might be missing in their diet. Between 1943 and 2009, bears were documented eating over 266 different species. That includes plants, animals, you name it, fungi as well. Digestion, so the primary sources of protein for bears is usually consistent of elk and trout. Sometimes mule deer, but generally 6 to 8 hours, they can digest 90% of the protein in elk and trout and about 40% of dandelion, clover, forbs. The reason being, bears are not really efficient at digesting high cellulose products. And so if you think about the early stage of plants, that's the best time for them to actually be eating plants. They don't have a cecum, so they don't process cellulose the same way that, let's say, ungulates would. Calorically dense foods in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, there's army cutworm moths and whitebark pine. They're displayed at the bottom of the screen here. The bears eat the pine nuts. The moths, they eat the whole thing. And so during the summer months, bears will climb, or they will stay dependent on where they're at. We have bears that will climb in elevation to access whitebark pine stands, which are an alpine tree species. And then we have really unique insect feeding aggregation sites where bears will actually congregate at these talus slope regions, and they will gouge themselves on these army cutworm moths. And we'll talk more specifically about these in future slides. The Lamar Valley, so if we're looking at, we hear a lot about, predator-prey dynamics. How many elk, how many mule deer fawns do bears actually take? And so in the Lamar Valley, male and female bears during June, it's about 1 elk calf every 2 days. If you think about that, that's a lot of elk calves. In the Yellowstone Lake area, so more central Yellowstone, you're looking at about 1 elk calf every 4 to 5 days. And part of that has to do with migration and when these populations actually arrive in these prospective locations. Cutthroat trout is another critical food source for bears, and we've seen that decrease in recent years due to lake trout in Yellowstone Lake. They have a direct impact on the cutthroat trout and their populations. So we've seen a 63% decrease in bears visiting spawning streams for cutthroat trout in the Yellowstone region, and they're actually increasing their predation on elk calves as a result. So again, you see this plasticity going on where they're shifting from one food source to another, and it has implications for other species in the ecosystem. Some of the stuff on the left here, so bear milk, I usually get asked about the breakdown for bear milk. It's 30% fat, which is why you see bear cubs usually nursing on their mothers longer than they need to. Usually it's 6 months that they are required to nurse, and then past that it's kind of opportunistic. And so you can see why. It's free food. You're feeding off your mother. They're kind of freeloading off of the energy of their mother. So really interesting things to think about. Anybody that's in pre-med or anything like that, bears don't get heart disease. They don't have high cholesterol, and they don't become obese. They don't have muscle atrophy. They go to sleep for 5 to 6 months on average a year, and they wake up built like a brick house. And so they don't have any, and the reason for this is because they rely on fat metabolism. So if you're a bodybuilder and we were able to rely on fat metabolism, like everybody in here would be jacked and we'd be ready to go. So they don't, versus muscle breakdown for energy, that's humans. And uniquely for grizzly bears, they recycle and reuse their urea, which is a product of protein metabolism. And so they're able to convert that back into nitrogen compounds, maintain that muscle mass, so they come out having burned all the fat that they put on for the winter, and they come out a lean, mean fighting machine. They also have slow twitch muscle fibers, which for athletes, you know that these slow twitch muscle fibers result in greater endurance capacity for prolonged periods of time. So marathon runners, if you think about that, or any runner running in general. This is just general food habits by breakdown a month. Kind of the annual variability is articulated in some of the error bars there, and then you've got the peak dates in orange. So you can just see how many different species bears actually consume. So army cutworm moths, these are they're cool little critters. It's really treacherous terrain where they exist. So you have army cutworm moths that are considered an agricultural pest in the Great Plains region of the United States. During the summer months when it gets super hot outside, these moths will migrate and they will come to the high alpine peaks in the Rocky Mountain West, including into Canada. And so they are seeking thermal refugia at these elevations. And so they're basically trying to get out of the heat. They go up, they stay in the rocks at night, or stay at the rocks during the day, come out at night, and feed on alpine vegetation. So they're nocturnal, found low-level agricultural areas. For a bear that spends 1 month foraging on one of these talus slopes, they meet half of their annual energetic requirements if they just eat moths alone. To give you an idea of just how fatty these moths are. So 40,000 moths a day, that's the equivalent to 20,000 calories. That's like going to McDonald's and ordering anything on the menu. If you ordered everything on the menu, you might not even hit 20,000 calories. So it's pretty amazing. Army cutworm moths are the highest calorie per gram food source amongst all food sources available to bears, and that even includes whitebark pine. So it is critical. These little moths that exist in the talus slopes play a critical role for a small population of bears. And so just to give you an idea, Jessica took these photos when we went up to a high mountain peak in the Absaroka Range in Wyoming. And this is after a fresh snowfall, and I believe this was August when this took place. And so this is, you can see, they're just little dots, but that's 2.5 miles away. So you can see for a long ways up there. Bears really heavily rely on these moths. It's a beautiful landscape. You can see forever, for days. You can just see how treacherous it is to try to recreate in these areas. But we went up there because we were trying to document bears actually consuming moths. And so we were successful in doing so. And along the way, we had some really cool opportunities. This is taken with a remote DSLR camera trap. So Jessica runs remote DSLR camera traps to mitigate our presence in when it comes to grizzly bears. They don't even know that the camera is there. This is a safer way for us to capture behavior without us actually being present. And so, unfortunately, some of the bears found one of the cameras. These were some naive youngsters that wanted something to play around with. That is most likely one of them, the culprits. But the terrain is absolutely beautiful. It's one to be reckoned with for sure. Super treacherous, and it's unique to just a cohort of bears that actually use it. So now to talk a little bit about movements, occupancy, range. So we all know that home ranges and movements are normally a function of resource availability. So is there food, is there a density of food in a certain area, or do you have to travel to find really good food sources? In the upper left-hand section of the screen, we've got the mean kilometers per hour for bears based on the month of year. And if you notice, the peak months are usually May and July when they start moving around a lot. You've kind of got this bimodal, you got these two peaks going on, and one of them coincides with emergence, one of them coincides with hyperphagia. So coming out of the den, trying to put on weight, and then one going towards the den and trying to put on weight. And so bears are going to have to travel a little bit more, be more active to get more food. Movements are based on demographics as well. So females that have brand new cubs probably aren't going to move as far as females that don't have cubs, or these large male bears or subadult bears that are trying to feel out the landscape and kind of develop a home range, get their feel for the landscape and where they fit in. If you look in this figure on the right, this is grizzly bear 399 and her daughter 610. 610 is in the orange, 399 is in the blue. You can see this notion that grizzly bears are territorial actually isn't true. There's a lot of spatial overlap. If you were going to show a similar figure with wolves, you would see that the delineation's a little bit different, where territories are established and you don't have a whole lot of the spatial overlap going on. One of the things that we are concerned about in the greater Yellowstone right now is density-dependent effects on the population, and what does that look like? And so if you look at the graphics from a colleague of mine, Andrea Corradini, and some of the members of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team, what they're finding over time is that we're obviously expanding with our occupied range for grizzly bears, but we're also developing some of these density hotspots. And so I'll eventually highlight where Grand Teton is in here. But so far, what we're finding, these are the four main findings of that manuscript, which is at the landscape level, bears have sufficient space to disperse. The problem is, when they do disperse, they're usually dispersing to the fringe of occupied range, and that results in conflicts. And conflicts look like getting involved with cattle, so depredating on cattle, depredating on sheep, getting into unsecured garbage. And so at this point in time, what a lot of my efforts are focusing on are managing those conflicts on the human-wildlife interface, being able to educate people about proper food storage, keeping garbage in, using bear-resistant infrastructure. Demography is primarily driven by density-dependent factors in the core area of the ecosystem. So if you look at the core area, which would be Yellowstone National Park, and the lighter red outlining ring, which is the grizzly bear recovery zone, those two areas would be the core of the ecosystem. Local population density, competition for limited resources, that's resulting in reduced body size and individual performance. The other thing that we're seeing is with competition increasing on the landscape, we're seeing female grizzly bears, the age at their first reproduction, it's actually being delayed. So it used to be age 4 to 7, now it's usually 7 and above. So we're seeing increases in the age, and that's usually because there's more dominant bears feeding on these food sources, and these younger bears don't have the opportunity to compete or don't have the means to. And so if we look here, that is where Grand Teton National Park is situated. And if you look, it's actually one of the more denser areas in the ecosystem right now. So that kind of signifies that southern expansion. Funny enough, that area is actually Pilgrim Creek or Pilgrim Flats in Grand Teton National Park, which has one of the best visibilities for grizzly bears probably in the lower 48. So if you want to see grizzly bears, go to Pilgrim Flats in Grand Teton National Park. So now I'm just going to go over brief movements to really articulate to everybody how far grizzly bears travel. It's pretty remarkable. They cover quite a distance. If you look at some of these, 51 miles in a week, 95 miles in a week, 10 miles, 97 miles, 66, and then all the way back up again, 106 miles. So combined, over 8 weeks, that bear moved 564 miles. And you might be wondering, how in the world do we acquire this kind of data? And it's through radio collars, through research captures. And so this bear is grizzly bear 810. He's a 551-pound male. And he had 28% body fat, and that was in the month of May when he was captured. So it's pretty amazing he's able to retain that much body fat even after hibernation. This device right here is a radio collar, and I'm going to pass it around. Just make sure it makes its way up to the front by the end of the presentation. That is what we are deploying on our grizzly bears in Grand Teton currently. When we capture these bears, we're collecting hair, blood tissue, teeth, all from research and management captured bears. And so this is all used to understand their blood, disease panels, tick-borne disease risks, baseline health. So in the era of climate change, we can understand if there are implications for baseline health in grizzly bears. This is a black bear that we're working on. This was our very first black bear research capture this year, back in the last week of September. And so these are a few research captures over the years that I've worked in Grand Teton. And so you can see the collar in that far left picture right there. Same one that's going around the room right now. All of our bears are tagged and radio collared when we do have the ability to. So denning ecology with bears. It's really interesting. So bears, it's instinct and maternal influence combined together. When it gets cold and there's no food, the power to dig a hole in the ground is real. And so the location of where that den might be located, or the positioning or the substrate, the bed material, that's all maternally influenced and learned from mom. And so a grizzly bear that might be separated from their mom as a yearling, as opposed to a 2.5-year-old, still has a very, very high chance of surviving on that landscape because they have denned with their mother for at least one season. They understand the process, and there is instinct involved. There's a lot of variability in elevation, 6,000 to 10,000 feet. Den construction, 3 to 7 days, or they might even be prepping it for 2 months. So there's a lot of variability there as well. Grizzly bears mainly are digging their dens. They seldom use natural cavities. And orientation of which way the den is placed actually ensures adequate snowfall, but we've found in recent years that this isn't always the case. Bears will dig a den wherever they want to dig a den. When they are hibernating, in their active phase, their heart rate is 80 to 90 beats per minute, respirations between 6 and 10, and that obviously drops during hibernation. So they enter this deep sleep, 8 to 19 beats a minute, and then respirations less than 1 a minute sometimes. So they are really depressed when they are in hibernation. Grand Teton National Park has what we call the Wildlife Brigade, which is a corps of volunteered and paid staff that helps manage and mitigate the human-wildlife interface, mitigating conflicts, educating the public, performing outreach and education. We patrol developed areas to ensure that food security is taking place in the park and that visitors understand that they are recreating in bear country. And so this was instituted in 2007, which coincided with grizzly bears really first showing up on roadways in Grand Teton National Park. And these are just a few images of what bear jams look like in Grand Teton. I do manage quite a bit of the human-wildlife interface managing these bear jams. It's really important. Some people might look at this and they're a little bit distraught that there's a 400-pound grizzly bear that close to people. And this is an adaptation that the bears have developed over time. It's called habituation. They lose that innate fear of people, and it enables them to occupy the same space in close proximity to people undisturbed. And this management strategy has been in place in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem between Grand Teton and Yellowstone since 1990. And so you can't beat the views with some of these bear jams. The other thing you can't beat are the number of people that you can reach out to and get inspired about wildlife stewardship and grizzly bear conservation. And that's really what drives me with my passion to convey that information to people and get them involved. This is Grizzly Bear 399. I don't know how many people in here have heard of her. She was 28 years old. The oldest grizzly bear in the greater Yellowstone was 34. That was Grizzly Bear 168. 399 has had 8 litters for a total of 18 offspring since she was born. And she is referred to as the matriarch in Grand Teton National Park. This articulates her lineage over the years. First litter in 2004. Her most recent litter was actually 2023, last year. She became the oldest reproducing grizzly bear in the greater Yellowstone known to record. She had 1 single cub. She came out of the den. It was a pretty memorable moment. I got to witness it. She created quite the fuss along the side of the road. She also has a really unique life history in that she had a quadruplet litter of cubs. She became the 14th grizzly bear since the Craighead study in 1959 to have a quadruplet litter. It's a really rare reproductive anomaly. What we've seen over the years is that older female grizzly bears in the ecosystem are more likely to actually have quadruplet litters of cubs. And that's through looking at capture documentation and ages. These are just all 14 litters that have been documented on record and in literature, including the Craighead data. So 399 is likely the third bear to actually raise all 4 of those cubs to weaning. This was my very first encounter with grizzly bear 399. This was my very first day on the job in Grand Teton working as a bear ranger. And so it was pretty amazing. Her tolerance for people and her resilience can teach us a lot about her species and about ourselves. Unfortunately, she was struck and killed by a car last week. And so it was a pretty rough week. And so she has been the ambassador for grizzly bear conservation for as long as she's been alive, and really provided visitors with a glimpse into the life of a grizzly bear and inspired countless of people in the up-and-coming generation about what it means to be a wildlife steward, not just to profess those values, but to actually live through them. And so whether or not, as biologists, we have a tendency not to recognize individual animals or want to develop a relationship with these animals. But for 399, it was unavoidable for me, both in a research sense and from a management perspective. This bear had such an impact on so many people, including myself. I always articulated to people it's not who she was or what her number was, but it was what she taught us about her species, number one, and what she taught me about myself and what she could teach everybody in here about themselves. What it means to be resilient, what it means to be tolerant, especially in today's day and age. Tolerance and resilience are 2 key quality traits that just don't seem to exist anymore. And so we can learn a lot about grizzly bears. Think back to that initial quote that I brought up from the Craighead brothers, and just let that sink in. So this is a photo that Jessica actually just had published today in High Country News. This was the last time 399 was seen before she split up with the 4 cubs in 2023 or 22. And so in her absence, there's actually a memorial in Jackson right now, and it just speaks to the impact that she's had on the local community and what she means to wildlife conservation as an ambassador for her species. She also represents the work that we have ahead. Her death from a vehicle, there's a lot of work that remains ahead of us for reducing human wildlife and human vehicle collisions and interactions to reduce unnecessary mortality of these creatures. If we want to persist and coexist with these bears going forward into the future, it's really important to reflect on what she stood for and what are some of the lessons that we learned during this period of time. She was also referred to as the Queen of the Tetons. And if anybody in here is interested, there's a PBS documentary that actually aired on 399 this year that focuses on her life and kind of the notorious fame that came with her. I will mention that that bear did not ask for any fame or notoriety. That was brought upon her. So again, some of the other exciting work that we're doing, this is more of a project that I've kind of pioneered myself. How many people in here are remote sensing background? Anybody? A few. So LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. And so this technology has largely been used for a geographic component. It hasn't really been applied to direct wildlife-based studies. And so what we did was we used a LiDAR sensor, which is a laser pulse, and it's based on direct time of flight. And we were able to create 3-dimensional models of grizzly bear dens and black bear dens. And so this I'll show you, we've got a manuscript in progress right now to the Wildlife Society. And so this is what it looks like. So the bottom are blueprints. So that's looking from the top down on certain bear dens. You can see the variability in structure and design. Up top is kind of the workflow, what it looks like processing these dens, being able to look at different aspects and characteristics. And so right now you're actually about to go inside of a grizzly bear den. So this is the other cool thing we can do. We can animate these 3D models and take people inside of dens that ordinarily would not have the opportunity. And so here we go, getting ready to go inside of a grizzly bear den, the bed right there. So there's pretty cool utility to this, especially in the era of climate change. We can get these models, input different variables, look at heat loss, bear energetics as a whole, and really find out which dens are actually more energetically costly and which are actually easier for the bears to retain energy and save energy during the winter months. And so these are a few dens that I've been to and so fortunate to visit. This was an absolutely enormous den, 9 feet in length. So as you can see, I could comfortably sit inside without having a problem at all. But then there's also these natural cavities where you've got to crawl and you've really got to squeeze into some of these nooks and crannies. You can see all the woody debris that's from a bear actually bringing bedding material in. Another thing that I'm working on right now is oral pathology, understanding what dentition means in wolf and bear species. Oftentimes people wonder, what is the ultimate demise of bears and wolves? And we can say definitively with the knowledge we have that teeth and the health of the oral cavity plays a huge role. If you can't eat food, you're not going to live, you're not going to survive. And so looking at the prevalence of different oral pathologies, different anomalies. This is an example of what we call supernumerary dentition or hyperdontia, which refers to excess teeth you don't need that just magically pop out. And there's different philosophies and hypotheses for why that occurs, but that's a unique one we just documented in a brown bear from Smithers, British Columbia. To give you an idea of bear teeth over time, so we're looking at anything from 1 year of age all the way to 20 years old, and you can see over time there's definitely patterns of wear. And there's also indications that bears that get in the garbage or access human foods actually might have unnatural wear or damage to their teeth that they have. Some other cool stuff we've been able to do using FLIR to document bear dens, looking at the heat signatures. This is a black bear that decided to den in the northern range of Yellowstone National Park. And this FLIR device is actually one that you plug into an iPhone. And so from over 200 yards away, we are still able to secure that kind of heat signature during the winter. It's pretty amazing technology for anybody that's looking to use that kind of device. It's definitely well worth the while. And so now I'm going to kind of wrap things up and talk about how far we've come. Well, bears have been on the endangered species list, grizzly bears in particular, since 1975. They've made a remarkable comeback, one of the greatest conservation success stories in our lifetime. Where do we need to go? There's still a lot of social acceptance that needs to occur. We need to learn to coexist with bears. We need to learn how to secure attractants, live on the landscape with bears, how to share these same spaces, while recognizing that there are challenges. And a lot of times, I think, in resolving conflicts and reducing conflicts, the old mentality used to be that we're going to focus on what drives us apart instead of the common and what brings us together. And so, undoubtedly, we can all agree that grizzly bears shouldn't be killing cows. They shouldn't be killing sheep. They shouldn't be breaking into homes. And so when you have a conflict like that, how do we fix it? I'm not asking for personal perspectives or opinions on how people feel about bears. How do we fix the problem? That's where we need to go. Because once we bring in that emotion, things start to get a little bit muddy. Habitat protection is really important. That is probably one of the most important things that I've got listed on here. Being able to secure these swaths of land in an era where there's increasing human pressure and increasing human threats on the landscape. We think about grizzly bear connectivity between the northern continental divide and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and how I-90 segments and fragments that habitat. And that basically substantiated the need for genetic augmentation, bringing bears in from one ecosystem to genetically exchange material in another. So we've got to think about habitat. We've got to think about how we can protect these swaths of land, not even just for grizzly bears, but for your mule deer, your white-tailed deer, your black bears. As we get more and more people, there's going to be less and less suitable wildlife habitat. We're going to have increased conflicts. There's going to be urbanization. There's going to be increased levels of habituation with wildlife. And habituation can be good and bad. Education and outreach is equally as important. Being able to communicate with the public, like I am today, being able to communicate with all of you, informing you how you can be good wildlife stewards, what you can do for the conservation of not just grizzly bears, but for other species throughout the United States. And so I'll conclude by showing you this video of a grizzly bear we captured in a culvert. This isn't a true culvert trap, this is a box trap. This was a research capture. This was grizzly bear 962. And at the time, I believe this was the first time that I handled her. Grizzly bear 962, not too many years ago in 2021, unfortunately had to be euthanized. And it was because people could not keep their garbage secured. And we had one in particular individual in the Jackson community that thought it was acceptable to feed the bears molasses and horse feed. And so she started to develop really bold tendencies, and she started to access unsecured garbage, property damage, breaking people's property, breaking into garbage receptacles. And so she had to be removed from the landscape. So when we think about grizzly bears growling, it's a pretty unique sound. That's actually the ringtone for my phone. So don't call me when I'm trapping bears. You're going to cause my researchers to probably have a brain hemorrhage. This is grizzly bear 688, really large grizzly bear. Surprisingly, Jessica's handled this bear before. I haven't been so fortunate. This bear is what I think embodies resilience for the primary reason that he was struck by a car, laid on the roadside for hours, got up and walked off, and then was caught in a research trap years later. And so when we think about, throwing in the towel in whatever aspect it is of life, think about this bear. It literally got hit by a freight train, went off into the woods, dusted it off, and kept on going. And he's probably going to live a very full life. So just think about that. Let that sink in. This is my contact information. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, if you've got any questions about the presentation that I've given here tonight, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have via email, phone, or my email's on there. And now I'll open it up for any questions that you might have.
I saw that on the slide that had their eating habits with the number of species. Talked about plants, animals, and fungi, but the slide said 4 kingdoms. So I was wondering what was the 4th.
Ooh, that's a good question. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Dirt, okay. I forgot. Yeah, it's unique. Yellowstone National Park has a lot of thermal features, and so there are microbes and mineral content in the soil that bears will actually eat. There's a very select few bears that actually do that. Thank you, because I forgot that. Yes?
Do you think the bears will be off the endangered list soon?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's been quite a bit of grumbling about the Endangered Species Act, and there's certainly different perspectives on it. I think from the biologically speaking, I think the parameters that have been established by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for population, all those goals have been met. However, I think to the contrary, there is a segment in the professional community of very accomplished individuals that believe that the states are not ready for suitable management, and they're not ready to manage bears on their own. And there's a lot of politics involved with that particular issue, and so I think it's not the biological parameters that haven't been met. It has a lot to do with social tolerance for bears and some politically driven decision making, whether that's ballot box biology or otherwise. It's a very contentious political issue at the moment.
I'm going to run the mic around as you guys ask questions and try this. Because we're recording, so it'll help us make it out.
What drew you? I don't know.
Just be loud, I guess.
Okay.
Just be loud.
What drew you to grizzly bears in Yellowstone specifically versus Appalachia or the Great Smoky Mountains and black bears?
What drew me to grizzly bears in Yellowstone? The Craighead brothers is the very simple answer. My very first grizzly bear, as I mentioned, was up in Glacier National Park. But Yellowstone held a very, after being there, going through Glacier, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, when I went to Yellowstone and I was able to see grizzly bears there as well, there's something about the park and its history and the natural history that surrounds grizzly bears that makes it a little bit, in my opinion, more unique than the Glacier National Park bears. And part of that has to do with the history of garbage dumps, the Craighead legacy. These two gentlemen, when I was out doing my field research, I was just like, I felt like a kid in a candy shop. I was like, I want to be just like Frank and John Craighead. And, some of the first stuff that they published, whether it was in Hayden Valley or, later on, they had gone to different brown bear populations. But, Yellowstone was the center for most of that. And I think it's, what's also driven me is the complex socio-political issues that follow that population of grizzly bears, as opposed to other populations of bears in the lower 48. It's really, if we're going to put an athletic term on it, it's a storied franchise. It's one of those populations that has a lot of history. There's tremendous recovery in this population, so that obviously the parameters and the techniques that are being used to manage this population are effective in recovering it. And ultimately, Yellowstone, when I first went there and just visited the park as a whole, aside from bears, there was something about the landscape there that was just very special. Whether it's being the first national park or if it's just the entire history of Yellowstone as a whole, that's really what drew me to grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone. I've always had an interest in black bears as well. And so I do research and we do study black bears quite frequently in the park. And we've got some upcoming research projects that we're working on black bears. It's interesting because I think black bears are less focused on too. And maybe that's why I was so drawn to grizzly bears, is because at the time that I was interested, they were a threatened species. And so I'm one of those people where, threatened species and endangered species are another particular interest of mine. So aside from bears being on the endangered species list, there are other species I'm interested in that are protected as well. But black bears being universally abundant, there's been a lot of research that's been done. And so a lot of that has been universally applied to different populations in the lower 48. They still have a special place in my heart, being that I grew up with them too. Any other questions? You have another one? Yeah? Yeah, go for it.
Have you noticed an effect with recent years? There's been an increase in the number of wildfires and also an increase in drought. Have you noticed an effect on the bear population?
That's a great question. Post 1988 fires in Yellowstone, it was really interesting. They didn't really see a dramatic effect on the grizzly bear population in Yellowstone. They had over 200 different foraging sites that they actually went out and identified and performed some statistical analysis. It's a really old study, so certainly I think some of that information might be outdated at this point in time. But based on our understanding, bears have that dietary plasticity and that resilience, and so they're able to adapt really quick and jump to other food sources. Even up in Canada this summer when we saw some of the fires, we saw grizzly bears seeking refuge. And so those bears would move down in the creek beds until the fire jumped and passed. And then they'd be right up the next day foraging on the green grass at the golf course. So that just speaks to the resilience and the tolerance of the species. And so if there is a species that is going to be unaffected by climate change and by some of the impacts like wildfire, drought, it's going to be grizzly bears because they have that dietary plasticity. They are universally one of the most distributed bear species in the world. They are the most universally distributed. And so they occupy everywhere from the United States up in the Canada, Alaska, all the way over to Europe. We have brown bears in Iran. So you think about the arid climate in Iran, there's bears in the Himalayas. You think about the rigid, ragged peaks of the Himalayan mountains. And so it really speaks to, how adaptable they are. What's your other question?
What attracted you to University of Wisconsin Whitewater?
Yeah. So University of Wisconsin Whitewater, initially my attraction was when I first graduated high school, I was looking at playing either baseball or going into ROTC. And I liked how the school in particular had an ROTC program. They had baseball. I also liked the diversity in what they offered in terms of programs. At the time, I didn't know that I was specifically going to dive into sciences, but the diversity of programs ensured that, whatever I decided, I was going to have that option. And so really what solidified the deal was after that first year that I was here, I said to myself, if I ever was going to come back to school, it was going to be here. And it had to do with the community, it had to do with the faculty, and it had to do with the institution and what it stood for. And I would put the faculty in the biology, anybody that works in Upham, I would put all those faculty up against any institution any day of the week. I really think that there's a high caliber of people here that are super passionate about what they're teaching, and they're passionate about instilling those values in the next generation of working professionals. And they're able to pass on that knowledge. And as they're passing on that knowledge, it's gaining value. And it's seen in the students. And I feel like I'm a proponent of successful education here at Whitewater. Had it not been for the faculty and what they inspired me to do, I wouldn't be standing here today.
In this picture and also some of the other pictures of the tranquilized bears, there's the red tube going in through the nose. I
Yeah.
wonder what that's for.
Yeah, so our bears, when we have our bears captured and they're immobilized, the standard of care is the top of the line. When that animal is under sedation and in our care, they are our number one priority aside from human safety. And so they get everything that a human would get when they are under. So that is actually supplemental oxygen. And so that's a nasal cannula. It's just a single tube that we insert into the nasal cavity. The reason that we insert it so far into the nasal cavity is because that actually ensures that more oxygen is being delivered to the bear, as opposed to your traditional nasal cannula that would just hook up to your nose here and go around your ears. And so delivering a higher concentration of oxygen to that individual. This bear, ordinarily you'd see with some of the other bears, they had blindfolds on. Does anybody have an idea why we might put blindfolds on bears? Just shout it out. That's part of it, yeah, absolutely. So part of it is to, keep those eyes covered. The other component there is when they are under immobilization and they are anesthetized, they don't have the ability to clean their eyes or anything like that. So initially in onset, they could have debris get into their eyes. They might not be blinking as much. There's also ultraviolet light from the sun that can penetrate into the eyes and actually cause damage. That's not acute, that's more of a chronic thing where over time. But it's the standard of care we're providing. We're trying to do everything we can to provide the absolute highest standard of care for these bears. Trying to think of what else we do. They have temperature pulse respiration. We check that every 10 minutes. So we do a rectal temperature. We do pulse respiration. So we have somebody count how many times that bear's breathing. And then we also have a pulse oximeter that we clip onto the tongue. And so that'll articulate the pulse, what that bear's at. And we monitor these vital signs. And the idea is that we look at the trend and we try to steer that trend the direction that we want it to go. And so if we start to see a trend, increase in terms of temperature, we're going to try to correct for it. We're going to try to soak that animal down, bring the temperature down, etc. So highest standard of care for the bears, nasal cannula. There's other things that we monitor for as well. Yes, sir.
Do you ever have anything to do with Kodiak or polar bears?
I don't directly work with Kodiak or polar bears, but I have colleagues that work with Kodiak bears. We're actually working on a collaborative project right now. I am with one of the biologists at Kodiak on analyzing the potential for microplastics in brown bears, and we're looking at it on a broader scale. We think about all these natural disasters, climate change, hurricanes, think about the massive mats of plastic in the ocean and how that might be getting into salmon. And what do Kodiak bears feed on? Salmon. And so we have this hypothesis that there might be increased microplastics in brown bears in Kodiak Island and in coastal populations. We're also looking British Columbia, Alberta, looking down into the greater Yellowstone as well. We're collecting scat samples to do this, so we're looking at scat samples to analyze that. That's all the interaction I have with Kodiak bears at the moment. I do have colleagues that work with polar bears. Yeah.
When they're under anesthesia, do they keep their eyes open, or is that, because you mentioned the slower blinking rate?
Yeah. So bears, when we have them immobilized, the drug that we're using is called Telazol, and it's a combination of tyletamine and zolazepam. And so when those bears are under anesthesia, they have a blink reflex. And so what we do occasionally, you'll see the eyes. The eyes can really tell you a lot about how deep a bear is in their sedation, and whether or not they're really light, or they might be starting, or they might be super deep. And if they're deep, their eyes are like, woof, it's like they're blown out. But as you start to see more pupillary reflex, you realize that that bear is probably metabolizing the drug, starting to come out of the drug. But we will occasionally tap that right at the corner of the eye to get that blink reflex, and then we can evaluate that pupil reflex and actually make an estimation of how deep that bear is. Yeah?
Has there ever been a time where it's like you've done that reflex and like they like metabolize the drug quickly?
For grizzly bears in particular, I have not had the experience of a bear coming out of drugs super quick. For black bears, the answer is yes. We've had a black bear where, I'm in the mouth of the bear looking at the teeth, and I get done doing what I'm doing. I turn around and that bear is sitting up, and it's not going to hurt me. It's starting to regain function of those front extremities, and so it's interesting. That bear doesn't necessarily have these control over its body, but it's starting to be a little bit more ambulatory. Now that I think about it, I've had it happen on one grizzly bear before where it did sit up and it just was doing one of these, and tongue's out of the mouth, it's continually lolling, but it's not going to do anything to hurt us. Usually when that happens, that means, hey guys, we're not doing anything else, we're going to get the bear back in the trap and we're going to let it recover. At that point, it doesn't matter. The priority of the animal and human safety comes above all research needs. Any other questions? Yeah?
What's the procedure for trapping and tranquilizing bears?
Yeah, great question. I didn't go into that too much. Really the down and dirty for bear captures, it would be we set a trap up, we get a bunch of smell going on, so we hang something stinky up in a tree, lures that bear in on site. We have remote cameras that are running, so we're able to identify and look at that remote camera and say, hey, is this an animal that we want to capture, or is this already a marked individual? And so if it's a marked individual, we might leave the trap locked open. We don't want to capture that bear. Bear comes in on site and might have cubs, probably don't want to capture that animal either. Capturing a female that has dependent cubs with it, there's a little bit more risk. It gets really dicey. And so if they're super young cubs, we're probably not going to trap that bear. If they're older age cubs, so like yearling to 2.5-year-olds, we might think about it. But then we also have to think about animal welfare over research needs. Is that absolutely necessary, or can we pass this animal up? And ultimately, no research need is more important than that animal's well-being. So we'll probably pass it up 9 out of 10 times. If we see an animal come on site we want to trap, we will unpin that trap door, we'll bait the trap. That animal will enter the trap. Usually it's an elk quarter or moose quarter, deer quarter. We put prime cuts of meat in there. I mean, it's enough that it would probably get me to go into the trap. So these cuts of meat, they're great. They're not rotten. We don't bait traps with rotten meat. That's fresh meat. We don't bait traps with human food. All natural stuff you find on the landscape. State agencies do it a little bit differently. They might use alternative foods, and that might be specific for different situations, management and otherwise. But that bear is going to enter the trap, likely pull on that piece of meat that we want them to, and engage that trap door to close on them. Some bears are so intelligent and have been trapped before, and they know how the trap works. And they will actually stick their back legs out the door, and they will do the full extension like Superman to grab that bait. So when the door comes down, yeah, it's going to hurt, but then they can use their feet to prop that door back open and get out with a reward. We've also got some bears that just like to disengage the trap. So they'll go up and just knock the trap and send the door down. And they're like, the hell with you guys. So it's, each bear has a unique personality. We find that out trapping them. We have to get super clever. There's been a trapper in the GYE for decades who uses something that we call a chum trigger. And so it's a piece of paracord tied to a little chunk of meat that goes underneath of the trap, but the piece of meat's inside the trap. And that bear, if it even moves it the slightest bit, that door is coming down. And that gets bears probably more than 90% of the time for bears that haven't seen that before. So once we get them in the trap, we usually have we'll use a jab stick to immobilize them, which is a long syringe pole. Just has a syringe at the end of it. Jab them, get that injection. They're usually down between 3 to 5 minutes. Once that bear is down, we'll crack open that door about 6 inches. We'll poke them with a pool stick to see if they're responsive. If they're not responsive and their airway is in a patent and good position, we will open that door and get them out immediately, and we will start the process. Usually from the time that that drug kicks in through when we have to wrap up, we have roughly 90 minutes. So we have a good amount of time to really perform every single, procedure that we need to, whether it's gathering blood, taking hair samples, ear tags, radio collar. When that bear is ready to be recovered, we will get that bear, put it back into the trap. We will loosely cover its eyes with a blindfold, and we will tarp the trap over and let that bear recover. Usually I would want to say on average, our recovery will trap a bear in the morning, work it, get done about midday, and then we'll release that bear in the evening. So there's several hours that pass that allow that bear to completely metabolize, have its feet about it so that it can go out on the landscape and be ambulatory like a normal bear and not like he just walked out of the bar. So we'll usually, when we go to release bears, what you saw in that first video in the slideshow, we have a release rope. And so we tie a knot, slam it in the car door, we drive forward with that car, and it causes that door to rise. Bear will exit. In odd circumstances, the bear will come charging at the truck, and then it's like, okay, got to get rid of this rope and go. But that's kind of the down and dirty procedure for how we're trapping bears. Who's got a question?
Just curious on your opinion on the third-party guiding services that are very prevalent in the area. If you think that's a good outreach on education for the average tourist, or kind of against, or just what your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate that question too. Guiding services, I think, are equally important in this ecosystem, particularly because of the education and outreach component. Being that, the big thing that I really harp on when I meet with the guides, and when I've sometimes done guides days presentations for the park's business resources office. And so the big thing that I tell guides all the time is that we want quality information. We don't want quantity. And so we don't want you just spewing stuff out that might not have any factual backing. We want quality information that's being transferred over to the parties that you are guiding. And so really high quality information. If they have questions, reach out to the park. We're always happy to share this kind of information, especially if it's going on to educate visitors and get them engaged about wildlife stewardship and conservation efforts that are going on in the park. Even on a personal level, like I've had guides reach out to me, like Facebook, they're like, hey, can you answer this question real quick for me? I'm on a tour, like I need it answered. And I'm like, yeah, done. So it's, when you have people reach out like that, that's great, because that ensures that they care about, they're holding themselves accountable for the quality of information and the accuracy of it going out to the general public.
What do you see as the next steps in your career, and do you have a dream role, title, or accomplishment?
The next step in my career is writing a desk. I really do believe that. And I think that might take form maybe in a PhD. I definitely have intentions to eventually pursue a PhD, in the near future when that shakes out and what project that's working on. That is a goal of mine. Certainly, I have a lot of field experience. I've been told by other faculty and biologists in the field that I probably have more field experience than people in supervisory positions with a variety of different species. And so to me, that kind of signals maybe I need to take a step back from the field work and put a lot of my effort into some of these areas that I might be deficient in or not have as much experience in. And so what you saw in here with some of the papers, I've been really devoting a lot of time to some of these projects that I've been working on, really getting that information out, getting it published, sharing that kind of information with other professionals. The LIDAR stuff, there's a huge interest at the international level for using that and integrating that into global bear studies for den survey work, because it's an objective, non-biased way to actually get sound measurements for den cavities. And that is something that a lot of researchers in different bear populations globally do collect as part of their data sources. And so with that in mind, PhD, I don't really have a dream title. I kind of believe that titles don't mean anything. Titles don't mean anything. Your position doesn't mean anything. your knowledge and what you inspire others to do is the most important thing. And I really hold that true and very dear to myself as I stand before everybody here today. I'm here because I believe in conveying this knowledge. I'm passing on my knowledge to everybody in this room. Even if you're not passionate about bears, I'm trying to get people engaged just to make everybody aware of what's going on, how unique this species is. Some of the biological parameters that have implications for human health. Anybody that has diabetes, heart disease, there's reasons to be inspired here by what bears, the secrets that they hold. And so the next step for me is just continuing what I'm doing in terms of my outreach, education, and inspiring the next generation of wildlife professionals. We live in a pretty tumultuous time politically and socially, and so wildlife conservation needs to be taken seriously. Habitat restoration needs to be taken seriously. All aspects of ecosystem services and management need to be taken seriously. And so that's why I'm standing up here now, is because it doesn't matter how young or old you are, it's being able to get people inspired and pass along that knowledge. So that's what I continue to do, and my intention is to get a PhD. Ultimately, I think a lofty goal of mine is to work with all the bear species. And so work with every single bear species worldwide. For those of you that don't know, you've got your giant panda. So working in China is a struggle. So giant panda, you've got the Asiatic black bear, the spectacled bear, the brown bear, the American black bear, the spectacled bear, and the sloth bear. And what bear am I forgetting? Polar bears, yeah. How could I forget polar bears? You can't forget polar bears. But yeah, so that's ultimately, that's a lofty goal of mine. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Kodiak bear is actually an offshoot of the grizzly bear. They're just bigger because there's so much food there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Kodiak is they're their own unique thing. Yeah. So they are separate from our inland grizzly bears that we have down here in the lower 48. Now, if you're going to compare the inland grizzly bears in Alaska to our populations here, they're the same. That's the the species is the same there. Ursus arctos middendorfi. So it's really interesting, the genetics and evolution of that population over time. There's a super special population of bears there.
Do you find that the way that bears get pregnant, is that make the pregnancy more efficient, or do they often have miscarriages?
So it's interesting because the way that delayed implantation works, it's hard to relate to it as a human being because our reproductive biology is much different than that of a bear. And so, women can get pregnant, and not have, it's like bears, they kind of have that window of nutrition that they absolutely need. And it's like that 30% mark or it's a no-go. And it's like almost, 100% of the time, I want to say, but I don't know for sure. In terms of, I think mature females that are ready to have cubs, I think now as we get into a density issue in the ecosystem where we're seeing that delay in first reproduction, I think more mature females are having cubs, which, hypothetically you would think that a female that's got more experience on the landscape might be more successful at raising cubs. But when you think about some of the other density-dependent factors that play a role, you might see infanticide or the killing of bear cubs by, other male bears to bring that female into heat and to mate with them. So I think that has really yet to be, evaluated in terms of like reproductive success amongst females. I know the study team is working on some projects right now that really dive into the reproductive biology and how density is playing a role in that. But I don't know if I could really truly speak to answer your question. Any other questions?
For the bear dens that you're mapping out with the LiDAR, how did you gather the photography for the inside there? Because I saw that you had like projections or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that just like pictures like with the camera and stuff like that, or did you have like a GPS like kind of centering device or whatever to keep so you could? Was it all like manually kind of stitched together?
That's great. Great question. So one thing that's kind of, and this is going to blow a lot of people's mind, but anybody that has like an iPhone 13 or greater has a LiDAR sensor on your phone. And iPad, so the iPad Pro, there's a LiDAR sensor in that device as well. And we actually use the iPad Pro, the LiDAR sensor on board, to capture these models. And we actually evaluated accuracy in that we were able to reference specific points, measure them physically, and then actually go into the model with the exact same vertices and measure. And we were seeing 98% accuracy with all the models that we had. The only models that we were not able to replicate with 90% or 98% accuracy were models that were captured by different observers. And different observers would delineate different points on the model, and that would create some subjectivity. In terms of the imaging that you see that's on the mesh, and so there's the point cloud, the mesh, and then you've got the object file. There are platforms out there, Polycam Pro, which is an application for both Android and for iPhones. That application actually is simultaneously taking photos as you scan the den, and then as it processes it, it actually overlays that onto the mesh. And so the photographs are not going to be as detailed. However, it still gives you a general idea of what's in that area, and it still maintains pretty high resolution in terms of photographic quality. Yeah, hopefully, I think I answered your question. Yeah, the application itself, I'd highly recommend it to anybody that's in the remote sensing field. Polycam Pro, it's really cool. It's got both LiDAR features and what we call photogrammetry, which gathers an array of images and actually forms a 3D model. So yeah, if you want to toy around with that and play with it, it's a really cool application. I think there was one other question. Yeah?
Do you remember the number of this bear?
Yeah, I know. This is 934. So 934 is a male, and you'd probably least expect it. It doesn't really look like a male bear to me. Very feminine coloration in terms, we see females have lighter coloration, and that's more of a general observation. I don't think we could definitely say that in literature, but it tends to be females are lighter in color, males are darker in color. This bear in particular weighed roughly 450 pounds, and I deemed as a major failure when he dropped his collar 8 days when he got into a fight with another bear over a horse. So in Wyoming, as you can imagine, we've got a very large ranching community, and when horses need to be disposed of, they're often left on the landscape. This guy got into a scuffle with another bear. The target region when male bears fight with each other is the head and the neck region. So that collar just got ripped right off, and they're fighting over a horse. So that's who that bear is. Yeah.
I'm guessing it's like for the naming of like the like 961 or like 399. Is it like just like, oh, the next bear we have is the next number, or is it like more detailed than that?
No, that's a great question. So 1973 is when the interagency grizzly bear team was formed, and from that establishment going forward to present day 2024 as of today, it's sequential numbering. So the numbers, so this bear 934, that stands for he was the 934th bear captured, ear tagged, and radio collared since 1973. Now, there are bears that might be too small to support a radio collar. And you can see, you've got a very, some of these collars, you can only get them so small. And we don't want to put a collar on a bear that's actively growing. That's not really fair, and we don't use expandable collars anymore. So collar materials advanced. We're only putting collars on, subadult bears, not, super young yearlings. And so those collars, they're made to stay on for about 2 years on average. And so only bears that are collared receive that 3 or 4 digit delineation or designation. We've collared more than 1,100 bears now in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Bears that are just captured, as I mentioned, that cannot be collared, they receive a G-bear designation. And so that takes form as like G274 or G581 or G234. And so that represents that bear actually was never collared, but it was ear tagged. And then for whatever reason, if we capture that bear at a later date, we can look at a lip tattoo. I forgot to mention we do lip tattoos. It's kind of archaic at this point, but if it has a tattoo, we can identify that bear as G261, and if we're able to get a collar on that bear, G261 becomes the next available number, if that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So when you're done with the collars, do you have to trap them again to take it off, or do you like remotely disengage it to make it fall off or something?
Yeah, so if you noticed when that collar was going around, I don't know where it wound up, but on that collar there's a black box. And so that black box is a commanded release device. And so that's programmed with a specific drop-off date. The peak duration or the longevity of our collars, it's usually 2 to 2.5 years that they last before the battery really starts to go on them. And so that commanded release is usually programmed for that timeline in mind. And so that collar will actually just drop off. That box will release from the banding on the collar. It'll fall off. And then when we have planes in the air that are flying, so we have telemetry flights to identify where our collared bears are. We still do telemetry flights even though we have Iridium satellite on our collars. We can identify where the collar was dropped. And then we can send a team out to actually recover these collars. Jessica's gone out on numbers of collar recoveries. I've gone out on a few. It's a rewarding, it's like if you were to ask me like one of the elements of field work that's most rewarding, it's going and recovering these collars, but it can also equally be the most dangerous thing that you do, because sometimes when a collar says it's fallen off, nope, it's still on the bear. So it's one of those things where that's why we're having flights. We have people flying so if they can actually see the bear and they can say, yep, John, that bear's still got a collar on, like this is not a dropped collar. But yeah, so that's what that black box is. We have a built-in safety mitigation, so if that black box fails, there's a cotton spacer, and we punch usually 2 to 3 holes in that, and that cotton spacer will eventually wear out over time, rip, and then the collar will fall off. So it's a fail-safe. We never trust technology fully to that extent, so that cotton spacer is kind of the backup mechanism for that. Any other questions?
All right, let's thank Tyler once again for being here.